Dealing with the dead can be a very sensitive and oftentimes challenging job. However, these souls have some stories to tell. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to have a friend who worked as a mortician. He told me that he liked the job, but something creepy happened that almost made him reconsider his profession. There was one time, he told me, that he was working on a body. The body of this particular person had been someone who had been thrown out of a moving vehicle at high speed. The person was in bad shape, limbs torn off, part of their face missing, and it was a really messy job. As he was fixing up the body as best he could, he swore he could hear something. It was almost inaudible and coming from another room. So he got up to check it out. Keep in mind that it was 2 a.m. at this point, and he was the only person working. He started looking around to see where the noise was coming from, but he couldn't find anything. Upon finishing his little inspection, he went back to tend to the body. But when he came back, something was off. There was something strange about the room now, a presence or a feeling that wasn't there before. The entire time he was working on the body, he felt like he was being watched. When he was finished, he finished all the essential paperwork and was readying himself to go home. And just as he was closing up, he looked through the glass window back into one of the rooms, and he swears he saw someone dart from one side of the room to the other. In a panic, he thought someone had broken in, and quickly undid all the locks and did a thorough search. No one was in that room, or any rooms for that matter. The building was completely empty. He was a bit tired. It was about 4 a.m. at this point, so he thought maybe he was just imagining it. So he closed up and went home, and tried not to dwell on it too much. About 2 months later though, he was speaking with a co-worker, and the co-worker was telling him that he really didn't enjoy working last night because he had to close up. He said that something happened that he couldn't explain, and my friend tried to be bold and just came out with, "Did you see someone running across the hallway?" His jaw nearly dropped, and asked how he knew. He said that the same thing happened to him. Apparently, they started talking with a few other people, and it was a common occurrence in that building. Needless to say, they felt very creeped out once it was validated that it wasn't all in their heads. One of my duties at the mortuary I worked for was nighttime body removals. One night, my partner and I showed up at around 2 a.m. to grab the paperwork for our removal. When we got inside, we both got the feeling like there was someone there. So we walked through the building, checking to make sure everything was secure, and closing all the doors. This included the casket room. Everyone hated the casket room. It was freezing cold year-round. The lights were always uncomfortably dim, no matter what maintenance did to try and fix them. And there was this mannequin in the corner in full military dress that just felt wrong. The only people who weren't bothered by the room were the cemetery sales staff, and that's only because they had no souls. So my partner and I don't find anyone, so we lock everything up ahead of time. We get back an hour later, and our new guest logged in, and decide to get a cup of coffee before leaving. He and I walk towards the kitchen, only to find the casket room door open about 3 feet. It's almost pitch black in there, and I can barely make out the red in the mannequin's uniform. It shouldn't be that close to the door. My partner and I froze for a second. Then I grabbed his wrist, and we backed up into the kitchen and straight out the back door. It honestly felt like if we'd have gotten too close to the casket room door, something bad would have happened. Neither of us would ever go near that room again, even during the day. I could spend time alone in the prep room or crematory no problem, so I'm not easily spooked. But there was definitely something wrong in that room. When my dad was in grad school, he worked in a hospital morgue, harvesting skin donations from cadavers. He also worked to prepare bodies and such, but for the most part, he was a skinner. His job was to take visible skin, usually from the back of calves and such, and preserve it for such use upstairs. One day, he was doing said job, and the body he was working on had gone into rigor mortis, with its arms straight out to the side. This made working on the body difficult, so he had another worker help him bend the arm under the body, using the body's weight to hold the arm under. Standard practice from what I was told. Anyway, he walks around to the other side of the body and brushes the bent arm, which subsequently flies out from under the body and slaps him in the chest. He said he screamed, dropped all his tools and ran out of the morgue like he was on fire. He vowed to himself that if stuff like that ever became normal, he would quit. He didn't want to become some creepy guy who enjoyed working in the morgue and laughing at grotesque things. A few months later, he was showing around some new employees, and the same thing happened. He brushed by a body, a limb struck him, and while all the newbies screamed and cried, he just started a little and quit the next day. He also liked to tell us the stories about the worst highway accidents he was around. Some guys were in the back of a pickup truck driving down the highway. Not that uncommon in Indiana, where he was doing grad school. They ended up bouncing out of the bed when the driver ran over something and they hit the pavement, only to immediately be run over by dozens of cars who had no idea what was going on. They were bringing in wheelbarrows of body parts all day. I used to work patient transport. I got a call to take a body from ICU to the morgue. Nothing crazy. I got to the ICU, and because it was a shift change, a large group of nurses were circled around the nursing station. There were 2 doctors there as well. I went up to the group to say I was ready. That was when I felt an incredible wave of dread. I saw they were creeped out, nurses and doctors alike. One doctor asked, "What was the temperature?" 101.5, replied a nurse. "When did he expire?" "Over 3 hours ago. Family requested additional time." Bodies are usually only allowed to stay 2 hours on the floor before going to the morgue. The whole group with me, trailing, walked to the patient's bedside. The doctor placed his hand on the patient's stomach. The immediate shock that came across his face was terrifying. The patient was burning up. After 3 hours, they should be cold. He said there was no medical explanation. He is an esteemed ICU doctor, with years of experience, so I trust him. I took that body down, and while in the elevator I thought of zombies, and I have never been so scared. But while waiting, I knew that I had to touch his stomach, or else I would never forgive myself. I had to be a tangential part of this medical anomaly. Through the pair of gloves, a body bag and 2 sheets, I touched his stomach and felt the heat radiating. I think they did an autopsy, but the conclusion was unclear. Or at least that's what they told us. I am glad that I didn't have to deal with that further. The night went on routinely, but it was the talk of the hospital for a long time, and still something that no one can explain. Working with the dead isn't as bad as you might expect. When someone dies, it's only natural for family members to feel upset, scared, and angry, and it's not very nice when they take it out on us, especially when we've tried to help restore their loved one to a fit and presentable state for a funeral or cremation. That's our job. I always enjoyed it. Something about the dead fascinated me. I remember that when I was 12, there was an incident outside our house. A truck driver had collided with a tree and consequently been thrown out of the vehicle. That's what we saw in the aftermath anyway. When we went over to check it out, we noticed that there was a man on a gurney, quickly being pulled away. The man was very obviously deceased, and it sparked curiosity within me. What happens to us when we die? I tried asking my mother that question, but she tried to dismiss it, not really being able to take in the scene and being able to deal with a curious 12-year-old. I think my mum was just a bit overwhelmed at the time, but it always got me thinking. And after I finished school, that's exactly where I went. Dead bodies tend to be quite easy to handle once you get the hang of things. Of course, it does always depend on the state of the body. There have been very rare occasions where we've received someone who's definitely past it. Those are always the worst kinds. The dead, I can deal with. But there was one workplace in particular that made me want out. I just moved cities to be closer to my girlfriend, and we were planning on moving in together. The relationship was going great. It was moving very fast, and I was pretty sure that she was the one. Spoilers, she was. We ended up getting married and now have 2 lovely children. But that's besides the point. She managed to look past the fact that I was a mortician, something that other girls usually thought was weird or creepy. I guess it helped that she was a nurse, as we kind of both had this appreciation and understanding that death is a natural process, and it's a job that someone has to do. I'd like to say, I think I did it quite well when I worked there. When I moved into this new city, I was lucky enough to be transferred to another branch of the same place we were working as it wasn't that far away. But from the first few days I got there was something off about the place. I don't really know how to describe it. It was almost like a buzz was permeating the room, or constant background noise. It wasn't always there, but when it was irritating, especially when you're working on someone. It always made me feel uneasy, jumpy, and put me on edge. I wasn't scared of the person I was working with. I'd done it plenty of times now, and it was just another job. I guess you learn to disconnect yourself. You don't think about who the person was or used to be, what they did, or generally try and evaluate them as a person. You just know that you need to treat them well and with the utmost respect to present them to their family. And that's what I did. So anyway, the first incident happened when I was going to take my lunch break. I'd just been working on this one particular lady. She was old and had lived a ripe long life by the look of her. So anyway, I put down my tools and go get a bite to eat. I was starving. I got called into work early and had been working on this lady for the past 6 hours. I needed to make sure I'd done certain things before I knew I could manage to take a break, and it was finally that time. So, I went to buy my sandwich and tried to get my mind off my work for a little bit. I usually lay my tools in exactly the same place all the time, in order for them to be accessible quickly and readily when I need them. I finished my sandwich and my lunch was uneventful. However, when I went back into the room I was working in, my tools hadn't just been moved, they were gone. This started to piss me off. Had someone come in on purpose and moved my tools? So I went around asking. It seemed like most people were still out on lunch. I decided to cut mine short. But that didn't mean that someone had moved them before they left. Knowing that I wouldn't be able to get answers for a while, I looked around until I found most of them, but one of them was still missing, and I went back to work. When the rest of my colleagues returned, I asked them if anyone had seen the tools I was working on, trying to be sly about it. But from the looks on their faces, everyone clearly denied touching anything. Remember, I was fairly new in this branch, and I wasn't super friendly with everyone just yet, so I thought they might just be playing pranks on the new guy. But, according to them, they hadn't. Okay, whatever. A few weeks later, something else happens. Again, I was working by myself on another body. I need a bathroom break. I go out for a quick whiz and come back. I'm gone no more than 90 seconds. And when I get back, the person I was working on had their arms behind their head, in a weird pose. This time it was obvious. I go around asking again, telling them that it isn't funny, and ask them why they're doing it and that it's not a cool prank. I only managed to find one person that I'm working with. The rest are apparently out, and that person firmly denied that she had any involvement. The look on her face made me believe her, but I was starting to grow uncomfortable, and the buzz was always in the back of my mind, this weird buzz or whatever that was in the building. Then I started to hear things. Now don't get me wrong, I know the sounds that the dead make, and these weren't those. There'd be times where I was working alone, where I would hear whispers in the back. I'd look around, and there would be no one. This is when things started to get freakier. The whispers escalated, and at one point I swear I could hear someone talking in the room, ever so quietly. It became very uncomfortable, and I thought I was losing my mind. So I took a few days off. I had been working extremely hard, and I needed some time with my girlfriend just to relax. So we took 3 days and decided to go to the park and just chill out and get out of work mode. But the day I got back, everything was still the same, and I still felt uncomfortable. That evening, I was finishing work on another person when I look up and I see a little girl, no older than 8, walking around the room. She has this absent-minded look on her face, and before I can say anything to her as asking her how the hell she got in and why she's there, she walks through a wall and vanishes. There was nothing discernible about the girl, nothing special. She just vanished, and I saw her for maybe a total of 3 seconds. This is when I started bricking it. I wasn't really sure who to talk to, so I casually started speaking to my manager, saying, "So, who's brought their kid in? Why they brought their kid into work?" He gave me a furrowed brow and a strange look. "No one's brought their kid in, dude. Why would you even say that? It would be cruel to bring your kid to work. Besides, the only person with kids is Sandy, and Sandy's off from work." Gave him a funny look, tried to smile, and just went back to work. It got me thinking a lot about the afterlife after that. I couldn't get the mental image of the little girl going through the wall out of my head. I carried on working though, and never experienced anything after. For the next 3 weeks, work was as usual, but the strange buzz sensation was still there. It persisted, and something just said in my head, I thought it was time to move on. Even though I liked my job, and really, I thought it was a great career, I decided to call it a day. Something about seeing that girl just spooked me beyond all rational explanation, and I decided I'd like to do something a little different. I mean, I thought I could always go back if I regretted my decision. I didn't. I now work in a bank, and am very happy. But, in all honesty, if anyone out there is thinking about studying to be a mortician, if you've got the stomach for it, it's a great career. And I enjoyed the time I was there. Let's just hope you don't run into any spooks on the job. I'm a male, and when this happened I was around 16 in the early 1980s. A friend and I hooked up with 2 girls our age in Queens, New York. We'd never seen these girls before, and were not sure where or how we met. We all got along well, so we started drinking buds and smoking weed. These were the post-hippie days, so everyone was partying at an early age. We wanted a private spot, and decided on the cemetery that was nearby. So we went passing all the gravestones looking for a grassy spot to lie down, and found one. The spot we chose was next to the crematorium. Yes, a crematorium. It was surrounded by grass, and was the only somewhat pleasant area in the entire cemetery, because there was sun and grass. Perfect spot to mess around. My friend went around the wall of the cemetery to be alone with his new kind of girlfriend, and to give us some privacy too. We started making out, etc. And then it hit me. I smelled smoke. So I looked up and noticed the chimney stack was smoking. I suddenly realized, holy shit, they're actually burning bodies right now. I didn't even know this place was still in use. It was cool and creepy at the same time. Being a teenager, and not really caring because we were in the moment, we started kissing again. About 10 minutes later though, I heard yelling. It was my friend. We heard commotion, but we couldn't hear what they were saying. Then, like a bat out of hell, my friend ran past me and screamed, "Run." There was a guy chasing us. The girl wasn't with him, so I did the same. Then I heard the guy behind me screaming that he was going to kill us little shits. That's when we knew he wasn't kidding. I was so fast, his voice faded away more and more until I couldn't hear him anymore. I figured he must be the guy running the crematorium. Unfortunately, we never saw those girls again. I didn't even know who they were to begin with. I just hope it wasn't them in the smoke later that day. I'm sure I would have heard something on the news. A shout out to the girls if you're watching to the video right now. I just want to say, I'm sorry for leaving you in the dust. My bad. I was taking a body to the morgue with a tech one night. People had used all the gurneys inside the cooler that were the closest to the door, and left the empty ones on the back row. I pulled the body out so that I could get to the back row to get an empty one out. Once the body was out of the way, I went into the cooler to get my gurney. When I started pulling, it bumped another gurney that had a body in it. The body's hand fell out of the sheet, and the tech screamed, pushed the body outside the cooler back in, and slammed the door on me. I was stuck in the cooler with no light, surrounded by dead bodies. This was before the era of cell phones, and the light switch for the cooler was outside. I had to rearrange the gurneys with the bodies on by feel to make enough space to squeeze to the door and feel around for a handle to get out. It was a very unpleasant experience, but I'm glad I managed to make it out. Let's just say being in a dark room surrounded by the dead isn't my exact idea of a fun evening. I didn't speak to that other tech for a week. I work as a mortician and funeral director. The worst incident I had was never actually with someone that was dead, but rather a customer that we had come to pay a visit. This person was burying their father. They were from a big family, and this guy had like 8 kids. Pretty good run, to be honest. He lived until he was 89, an age that I think most people aspire to live to. One of his sons, though, was in his late 30s and looked like a combination between Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Incredible Hulk. This guy was huge and at least 6'6". He came in and was telling me all about his dad, obviously very upset. We were making arrangements for the funeral and such, and their father had requested a cremation. So we're sorting out all the paperwork, and the guy starts to cry. I try to comfort him as best I can, saying that his father was probably a lovely man, and that he's probably at peace now. When I said that his father was a lovely man and at peace, he looked me dead in the eyes, and the raw anger and fury in this guy's eyes, the likes of which I'd never seen in my profession before, engulfed him. He looked at me and said, "How dare you speak about my father? You never even knew him. How dare you think that? He was a great man, greater than anything you could ever expect." I expected him to continue ranting, but before I knew it, he slammed me into a wall and punched me repeatedly in the chest. Punch after punch after punch. It only took him a few swings before he realized I was out cold. And I remember waking up a few minutes later on the wall, surrounded by my colleagues. The guy had driven off, I assumed to cool down. The police were called and came over. My colleagues ended up calling an ambulance. I found it hard to breathe, but fortunately there was no bleeding. I was taken to hospital and was given the all clear. And I told my colleagues that I was not dealing with that guy. Honestly, part of me really wanted to do something cruel and send them to another mortician, but I knew that that would be too much. When you lose someone, it's normal to overreact. Just please don't take it out on us. We didn't kill your family. We're just trying to help you. I didn't see the guy again, but one of my co-workers did tell me that he came back and was super apologetic. But still, that didn't mean he could just go attacking someone willy-nilly. I was okay. I had to take a few days off because of the bruising, and I found it a little bit hard to breathe, but it healed up. For those few seconds though, when he had me against the wall and he was pounding his fists into me like a piece of meat, I was worried that I was going to be filling one of those caskets a lot sooner than I had anticipated. I worked with morticians for a while, although I never actually did their job. My job was to bury the caskets. It's not a difficult task, but there was one point that really changed things up for me. The guy who owned this plot had 1,000+ spaces in the cemetery. My boss helped me down to the grave and casually asked me to hand him the casket. When I looked, it was barely bigger than a microwave. I did so, and the image of my 2-year-old son was flashing through my eyes. I couldn't take it. I quit a week later. He understood, and we're still friends today. The heaviest coffins are always the smallest. It kind of reminded me of something my friend told me actually. His older brother died at birth, and he always grew up knowing that because his parents talked about him, and they had a few photos of him around the house, and they would always visit him at the cemetery. I even actually went as well once with him, and he never really realized anything until he came across a baby book while snooping for Christmas presents. It was his brother's baby book. It started all happy and normal, because his mum obviously started it off when she was pregnant. But when he died, it turned into a memorial of sorts. The ink imprints of his little feet that they do at birth made him very real to him. And it struck him that he had a brother that he never got to know, and that their parents had a baby that they never got to raise. Hospitals are creepy places in general. This is a story that happened to my dad. He's been a nurse for over 20 years now, most of which was spent in the ER. For a while though, he was working the 3rd shift at this old hospital in Chicago. One night, a man died, and my dad was left with the lovely task of pushing the guy on a gurney to the hospital's morgue. This next part sounds so cliche, because it's something straight out of a B horror film. It was all poorly lit. The hall, tile walls and floor were dark, and there was complete silence except for the footsteps of my father and the squeaky wheel of the gurney as they went across the hall. To top it all off, it was an old creepy hospital in the middle of the night. Of course, the body had gone stiff at this point, and the man's arm had kept sliding out from underneath the sheet and hanging down. So my father has to repeatedly put the arm back up, and without fail, a few steps down the line it will fall back down. Nothing supernatural. But my dad still has nightmares about it. Because when he went to pull the sheet down on one occasion, the man was smiling up at my dad. He has so many awful stories about the things he's seen. The poor guy has PTSD. I used to work in a hospital, in the IT department, and we did a number of overnight rollouts, as well as on-call work, and response when issues occurred overnight. Many weird things happened, or appeared to happen. The thing that struck me as oddest was when I saw the coroner running at full speed down the corridor in the opposite direction towards the morgue. This guy, an older guy in his 50s or so, was going at full speed. I had never seen him have to amble before, but this time he was really going for it. As he got close to me, he yelled out, "Out of the way! I've got another live one!" I'm not sure what was more disturbing, the fact that he was dealing with what I could only assume was a dead body, and now appeared to be alive, or the fact that he said, "another." After a bit of research, I found out that it's actually a lot more complex than you might think. Just because your heart isn't beating doesn't mean you can't be revived, even several hours after it stops. This is because if your body is cold enough, your cells do not die, kind of like cryostasis. If you can heat the body, as well as give the cells the proper amount of oxygen, the cells do not burst and you can survive. This happened to a guy who fell through ice and led to breakthrough research. Also, being totally brain dead does not mean your body is dead as well. This is a matter of opinion, really. Without being blown into a billion little pieces, it's a real bitch to pronounce someone dead in the modern world. This was my first strange experience at work, when I started my embalming career. I worked at an independent mortuary service, and I had just started my shift and was using a restroom in the back. When I came out, I heard what sounded like a girl sobbing, and the sound of feet shuffling around on the floor. The floor was kind of gravelly, and had a very distinct sound if you scutted your feet on it. The sound was coming from around the corner that led to a small room where we would store embalmed bodies, ready to be delivered to their respective funeral homes. I figured someone was upset and crying, so I kind of snuck in and could still hear the sobbing. I was worried that someone had sneaked in and thought that they were going to get into trouble, so I was ready to give someone spiel to get out ASAP. But when I peeked around the corner, the room was empty. There was no living person in there. I noticed that there was only one body in it as well. The young girl. She shot herself on the side of the head. I wasn't scared per se, but I'm pretty sure you could audibly hear my heartbeat. I closed the door and went on with my day. That really got me thinking about the afterlife after that. This story didn't happen to me personally, but was something relayed to me by my long-dead science teacher. He put himself through college during the Depression by working at a funeral home. He didn't enjoy it all that much, but he managed to do the job and got reasonable pay. One hot summer night, before the advent of air conditioning, he was there alone in the room with bodies. Well, in unison, they all started wailing, which absolutely scared the shit out of him. It turned out that the hot air expanded in their lungs and reached a critical point at the time, and caused it to be expelled through their vocal cords, resulting in said sound, not in the apparent zombie apocalypse. Needless to say, he didn't want to work there for much longer, but being unable to find alternate employment, he stuck with it until he managed to finally finish college and find another job. He used to tell everyone in class this towards the end of the semester, and we always got a really good laugh out of it, and profoundly put each and every one of us off ever considering mortuary science as a career.